Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Samudra and welcome to Managing Problem Behavior in the Classroom, EDX 640. Before we begin, I thought I'd go ahead and just introduce myself a bit. So I am new here to University of South Carolina. I'm happily married. This is my wife, Emily, and we both come from Lexington, Kentucky, where I worked on my PhD at the University of Kentucky. Go Cats! The four-legged hairball down there that you see is my dog Lady. She's a ham. She's 11 years old. We see the age starting to wear on her, but she still plays like a puppy. So that's me. Before we really get into this course, what I'd like for you guys to do is go to the discussion board, and I'd love for you to just kind of give me a couple tidbits of information about you and who you are. I always think that's helpful to kind of hear about backgrounds, what you're currently doing, because that means, given that our course size is relatively small, I can tailor a lot of our instruction to meet your specific needs as well. Okay, so some basic rules. I prefer that you contact me via email. The email address is found on the syllabus. It's msamudre@mailbox.sc.edu. That's going to be the best and the quickest way to get in touch with me. I'm usually pretty quick about responding back to email. So usually within 12 to 24 hours I'll get back to you, but probably it's going to be within 2 to 3. My office is in Wardlaw 235H. It's in the Special Education Suite. We can also meet in person if you feel that would best meet your needs. Just contact me via email first, and we can go ahead and set up a time, and I'll make sure to be there. Next, these are just boilerplate information stuff, and I'm sure you guys know this, but all assignments must be turned in by the due date. You should follow the syllabus pretty closely. That's going to indicate at the very latest when each assignment and module needs to be completed. I do not accept late assignments, so it is super important to not fall behind and make sure that you're meeting each of those deadlines. Second, this course is comprised of different modules, 4 in total, and in each module there's a bunch of activities that you have to complete by a specified date. Now, all you're going to see right now in the course is Module 1, where this lecture is located. But after the due date for Module 1, which is September 17th, then you'll see Module 2 pop up, and that'll become visible to you, and so forth until we get to the end of the course. And lastly, plagiarism. Don't do it. I just expect your original ideas. If you are going to cite somebody else's work, make sure you're using APA format. And just, I don't think I need to spend too much time on that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. So, yeah. Alright, so let's get back into the course and kind of just approach this broadly. Why even learn about classroom management? First off, it's notoriously known to be a contributor to teacher attrition. Many teachers commonly report that it is among the most stressful pieces of their teaching career. Because when you imagine everything a teacher has to do, okay, from an academic standpoint and just ensuring a positive working climate in their classroom, you have until August to June to do all of this. And imagine that you have, 1 or 2 non-responders in your class. When I say non-responder, I mean these are students who are not responding to the traditional classroom management practices that you might be implementing. And if the behaviors that they engage in are problematic enough, meaning they have some impact to their safety or the safety of others, then your instruction, your flow, and any progress towards meeting your objectives are often frozen. So I call this the big freeze. Okay? Now that freeze can evoke some emotional responses from the teacher, and reasonably so because all of your instruction is completely halted. All right? But everything you're expected to accomplish in the lives of your students are temporarily halted, which is why we might often say that effective classroom management is often a prerequisite to effective classroom instruction. Now, how can we teach as well as we're trained if we lack those basic classroom management skills. And if a student is engaging in behaviors that are problematic enough and they require more individualized intervention to adjust those behaviors, how can we possibly kind of get the classroom going normally and in a homeostasis of sorts if we lack the ability to manage student behavior? So oftentimes, and this is, I say this generally speaking, one cannot happen without the other. All right, so there's plenty of research to cite that states that teachers are often ill-equipped or unprepared to manage problematic behavior, okay? But there's a lot of research evidence that suggests about which interventions are effective and which might not be. To that second point, I want you to think about what you commonly see in classrooms if you were to walk into a general education elementary classroom. And that's the clip chart, okay? With the clip chart, you might see a bunch of colors. You know, I think they have so many colors right now, might as well be a bag of Skittles. And, you know, there's no research evidence that supports that actually works, okay? However, it's used widely across, pretty universally actually, across many classrooms. I do think we're actually at the cusp of seeing a paradigm shift in that hey, this clip chart system might not be the most effective of tools. We'll discuss more of that, but think about what you see commonly occurring in classrooms, and hopefully as a result of this course and as a result of your training, we'll be able to be consumers of research and know evidence-based practices and know what is recommended. But then I think it'd be interesting to see how it aligns. What does what you see in a classroom currently and universally speaking align with what you know works, okay? So one goal of this class is to make you in tune, okay, to both the challenges of managing challenging behavior and what works. The challenges with this respect come into issues such as fidelity of implementation, which we'll discuss in time. It comes into, effectiveness of interventions, the time it takes for an intervention to work. All of these things really play into how effective our individualized behavior management is. Okay, so I want to take you to this, all right? And I want you to pay attention to the dark gray bars and the light gray bars with lines through them, okay? This is from some colleagues, Andrea Flower, McKenna, and Herring, and they conducted a recent review to the extent that teacher preparation programs actually provide instruction across these 4 domains of behavior management. Universal interventions, which you might see applied to a whole class or in a whole school. Ways to increase appropriate behaviors, ways to reduce challenging behavior, and behavioral assessment, which is important in identifying pinpointed and targeted interventions that can help to decrease problematic behavior and increase appropriate behavior. But I want you to pay specific attention to these 2 bars. Just visually, graphically looking at this, we see SPED programs, which are the darker gray bars, receive much more instruction in areas of comprehensive behavior management instruction, as opposed to their general educator colleagues, which are indicated by the light gray bars with lines through them, which can be problematic when you consider the number of students who engage in problematic behavior but are receiving most of their services in general education classrooms. So I wanted to kind of paint this picture because this design, or this inquiry into the design of teacher preparation programs, reveals that the current makeup might not be sufficient, and it leaves our teachers, specifically general educators at times, ill-equipped to fully meet the demands of teaching. And when it comes to managing problematic behavior, this is extremely concerning for novice and veteran teachers alike. So we've essentially discussed this in an earlier slide, that effective classroom management is oftentimes a prerequisite. So I don't want to go ahead and belabor that point too much. But these are basic competencies that teachers might be expected to know once they enter the field. But it's important to note that these things are things we can implement universally or class-wide. And you might have seen some schools adopt a creed of some sort or an acronym that indicates desirable behaviors and expectations for students. But what happens when one of our students engages in a behavior that is more serious than the off-task behaviors or talking out of turn or basic task completion behaviors? Well, we might rely on an ethos of punishment, okay? And what I mean by that is that we tend to rely on punitive practices, which ultimately foster this culture of punishment. You know, that whole mantra, what worked with me should work with these kids too. Wrong, okay? Oftentimes, students who don't follow the rules are removed from the classroom, okay? Now, for you, for me, it might have been enough that the threat of suspension or the threat of a grounding might have been significant enough and so aversive that it actually prevented us from slipping up or engaging in problematic behaviors ever again if we ever did, okay? But think about those kids who, when repeated removal leads to suspension and then expulsion, and then starts down this cycle that ultimately is detrimental to overall student outcomes. But here's the thing. Why do we keep doing this in school? Why do we keep fostering this culture of punishment? Okay? If, you know, and I assume everyone in this course is in this career and in this profession for the betterment of the student, but why do we continually engage in these practices such as suspension and expulsion that are exclusionary practices and remove them from a learning environment? Here's some possible answers, and based off my experience as a teacher and just when I've done some consultative work too, the thing about punishment is that it's easy to administer, okay? It's much easier to remove a student from your classroom who's being disruptive than, you know, doing something a little more multifaceted, which would actually force a student to stay in the class, and then, but ultimately that would also, you know, have you encounter the student and the behavior even more frequently. Sometimes we might actually lack the confidence or the training to implement more complex behavioral interventions. Another point, which I think is a significant one, are the stresses of teaching. Everything you have to do, just think back to the, you know, when we were discussing at the beginning of the lecture, when you have all of these grades you have to get in, all of these assessments you have to administer, you have 27 other kids to manage in the classroom, and if you're in a resource or self-contained setting, you might have like 8 to 10 kids to manage, in addition to that one student who's engaging in much more significant, severe, and problematic behavior. The stretches of teaching can kind of implode on us and kind of come in and cave us in, which is why we might, and this is what I think, and there's some, you know, commentary in the field that further supports this notion, is that we do this stuff to escape, okay? Because of the stresses of teaching are so vast and becoming more burdening with each day in this career, in this profession. But we do this stuff to escape, because in that time when the student is out of our room, we get to return to instruction as normal. We get to, you know, get our assessments in. We get to go home and come back if the student was suspended across multiple days, and we don't have to encounter it again, okay? Because it can be super stressful. What I hope that we cover in this class, though, is that, you know, we can't continue on this cycle, all right? We can't continue on this pattern because it is resulting in dismal outcomes for students that engage in problematic behaviors. So, before we go on to part 2, I want to impart you with this message, that teacher behavior is oftentimes, because of those factors that we looked at before in the slide, it's a lot harder to change than student behavior. But what you must remember are that teachers are change agents, okay? If you leave with nothing from this class beyond this, then I'll actually consider it a win, okay? Because in order to change student behavior a lot of the times, we have to change teacher behavior first. So now I want you to go ahead and click on part 2, which is in a separate link in this module.